Hello, good afternoon, good morning.
How are you? It's afternoon on my side.
Where are you located?
I'm located in Paris. How about you?
In Paris, good. I'm calling from Prague, so it's like afternoon, evening as well.
Yeah, okay, so that's relatively same schedule. Right, let me just first make you a host. Hi, Burak.
Hey, Luis.
How are you?
Great, thanks. How about you?
I'm good, thank you. Where are you based at the moment? Is it morning, afternoon?
It's 5:30. I'm in London.
Ah, cool.
Are you guys in France or?
I'm in Paris on my side.
I'm in Prague, Czech Republic.
Okay, cool.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Are you doing this every week or?
We're doing this every month.
Every month.
Yeah, well, let me try to share my screen up so I can start. Yeah, we do this every month. Can you see my screen okay?
Yeah, I can see.
Just trying to put a big view here. Okay, sweet.
I tried to register on Castor Doc, but it looks like we need to have a sales call. Is that correct? Can I just sign up and try out?
I think no, you would need to speak to a sales before signing up and trying on. Hi, Allegra.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you, Louise? Good to meet you.
Great, thank you. Is it morning or afternoon where you are?
It is morning. It is 9:30 in the morning. I am in San Francisco. Where are you?
I'm in Paris, so end of the day here.
Very nice. Are you French? I would guess with a name like Louise.
Yeah, I'm French, definitely.
Nice. I went to the French school here in San Francisco, so.
You went to a French school?
Yeah, in San Francisco. There's some lycées here. There's actually probably about 10 in the US. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, so do you speak regular French or?
I do.
Oh, that's really cool. That's rare. It's usually not the first language you learn.
That's true. That's very true, but it was my first language. So yeah, if other folks on this call spoke French, I would jump into French, but I won't.
No, clear.
Oh, I can say like bonjour and that's it. Nice meeting you, Allegra.
Good to meet you too. How do you pronounce your name?
It's Zdeněk. I go by ZD. It might be easier for you guys. Yeah, but if you speak French, it shouldn't be difficult to pronounce it. But most of Americans, they're struggling with my name, unfortunately.
Zdeněk. Very nice.
Yep.
응? 22명. 자기 이름이 나온다는데.
Sorry, could people that are not members of the panel mute themselves and also maybe turn off their camera if possible? It was meant to be done automatically, but it hasn't. So it would be great if you could. Thank you so much. Thanks. So then we can have a clear focus. Okay, so I guess we can start, and more people will join along as we continue. So actually, if you give me a second. Yeah, okay, so let's start this. So I wanted to first start this discussion about achieving consistency over your metrics by introducing our speakers, starting with myself. So I'm Louise Delaitz. I work in growth at Castor, and Castor is a data catalog tool which mission is to help companies find and understand their data through a collaborative interface. I would also like to welcome our second speaker, Allegra Holland, who works at Transform. Transform is a metric store whose mission is to create company-wide alignment around key metrics through their tool. The founding team of Transform met at Airbnb, and they decided to launch Transform after seeing Airbnb's internal metric store transform the way companies make decisions and leverage metrics. So that's interesting to know. Then I'd like to welcome Zdenek. Hope I'm pronouncing this well. Zdenek works as a product manager at Good Data. And Good Data is an embedded BI and analytics platform seeking to help organizations build analytics for their end users. So this company provides self-service analytics, low-code and no-code interfaces, and embeddable data visualization, amongst other things. And finally, I'd like to welcome Burak, the founder of Metricule. Metricule is an open source project that lets you define your metrics as code in a central metric store, and later lets you sync these data models to all your data tools. Metricule was acquired by LiveRamp a month ago. And for a bit of context, LiveRamp is a platform for data connectivity, which seeks to enable companies to better connect, control, and activate data to improve customer experience. We were meant to be joined by Jeremy Cohen, who works as a product manager from DBT, but he had to cancel today due to an emergency. But I'm confident that we have three very high quality speakers who are experts in the domain, so I'm not worried, and you shouldn't be either. Now, before we start this panel, I'd just like to give a quick intro into the topic so we can all be aligned on which direction we're heading for these next 45 minutes or so. So just to have a quick recap on the issue of inconsistency over metrics. Well, every company and organization has to define metrics and KPI simply to track performance and align towards company goals. The issue is today metrics definition are spread across spreadsheets, internal dashboards, and data tools which keep proliferating and which will keep doing so in the future. So the problem will only be getting more salient. So the problem is that now reporting supposedly simple metrics like revenue or ROI can become extremely tricky due to multiple metrics definition and logically lack of trust in how these metrics are calculated and the data. And because this system is fundamentally fragmented, it leads to disagreement about definitions, ownership, and accuracy of metrics. So this ends up causing stakeholders to be disaligned about company progress and therefore about company goals. Because logically, if you cannot know where you are, it's hard to pinpoint where you're going. So turning to the solution, the problem with the solution is that it's far from straightforward. The intuition we had is that it's a mix of people, processes, and tools, and there is no single mix. It's different for everyone, and it changes according to industry. So on the people side, there's need to rethink the organizational changes that could improve the way metrics are defined and stored, allowing to build understanding bridges between departments. So for example, should metrics be defined in a top-down manner or in a bottom-up manner? That's a discussion to have. Processes also come into play. So there might be specific workflows and processes for metric definition and validation that could solve this metric consistency issue. And finally, it's hard to do great jobs around this metric issue without a great tool. So there'll also be a discussion around which tool can unify your metrics by providing a centralized repository that can get everybody aligned. So I will now turn to the speakers who will definitely know more about this issue than I do. And I would like to start with a question that can help us frame the topic. And this question is why is this consistency over metrics so hard to maintain? And what do you think are the 2 or 3 factors that make it so difficult? And Allegra, would you mind starting with an answer to this question?
Sure. So I think that consistency is tricky for a lot of different reasons, but I think that the fundamental reason boils down to it's just hard to define KPIs that matter to the business and sort of come to an agreement on how they should be quantified. And the process of defining metrics as a collective group with technical and non-technical folks in the room is just challenging. And most of the time it doesn't even happen. And both groups have trouble conveying the right context around the ask that they have. And things get lost in translation, which is just normal when you're in the business of abstraction. And then sort of layer on all of the complexity of lots of different steps in the data pipeline leading up to sort of the finalized, cleaned, summarized tables for, downstream analytics, BI, what have you. And probably lots of different people on your data team responsible for disparate, minute steps, and they all don't understand how their work will be used by the business downstream. And so, if you're lucky, you end up with a nice clean data set to hand over to your finance or sales team. But now they don't understand what they're actually getting because they don't operate in the world of tables and data structures at large. And so those data sets don't actually get used. So there's complexity in sort of the whole data pipeline leading up to the handoff to business teams. But more generally, I think the major sort of complexity in consistency over metrics is you need a consistent definition and you need to track decisions made around those definitions, and those change over time. So you need to capture that whole process and share the right amount of context with business and technical teams so that they're all on the same page about what a metric is, how it changed, why, what are the source systems, etc.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Brack, can we get your view on that?
Yeah, of course. First of all, metric is not actually something new. Most of the time, all these BI tools like Tableau, Power BI have their own way of defining the metrics. But historically, we were only analyzing data in some specific ways. We were only adopting a single BI tool and consuming all of our metrics within that BI tool. But now metrics is the center of everything. We need to do collaboration. So there are multiple data people maintaining all these metrics, and these BI tools like Tableau and Power BI and others in the specific BI tools provide a UI, user interface, for you to define the metrics, which makes it hard to collaborate with data people. So the metrics needs to be written in a collaborative way, which requires us to define them as code, just like the software engineers. So collaboration is one key part. The other part is the maintenance. So we need to, it's not just about the charts. We need to monitor them, pinpoint the issues before the business people actually realize the problem. So we need to have right tooling, right mindset to be able to maintain everything, because we will have hundreds of metrics, hundreds of people trying to analyze the data through metrics or take action or utilize them in some ways. And the organization needs to have a consistent way to access and define all these metrics in a single place.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think we're starting to have a mostly complete view of the issue. Zdeněk, can I just get your view on, do you think this problem is new or more salient than it used to be? Because I was talking with people from more legacy companies, and they were already complaining about consistency over metrics. But do you think this is getting a bigger, more salient problem?
Oh, I think that, it's certainly not new. So most of us know these terms like Excel hell, for example. So this problem has existed, since long time ago. And everybody who uses spreadsheet, who receives, 2 different spreadsheets with 2 different revenue numbers know what I'm talking about. Then actually there is this data democratization process. I'm not a big fan of these buzzwords, but it essentially means that data are now consumed by many more people. So they are getting them through their applications. That is, we do embedded analytics. So for example, every single SaaS application contains some reporting or some analytical tools or something, dashboards or something along these lines. So data are much more exposed, so that makes it worse. On the other hand, I think that what makes it better is that cloud consolidation and the fact that most of these analytical experiences work on top of the same data layer, something like Snowflake or Dremio. So at least the data, they are working with the same data. So and then with some data catalogs and something along these lines, we can at least capture the definition of the metrics, the kind of data layer of the metrics. And then the biggest problem, I think, or the big component of the problem that we are facing here is that there is lack of standardization, and many different tools, they use different languages and different expressions to define the metric. So that's part of the problem as well. But as I said, I think it's actually getting better with cloud. So cloud is helping a lot.
No, it's true. If you have to define your metrics in a different language in each of the 10 data tools you're using, it does become a nightmare. Right. Well, now turning to the solution part, which is essentially what we're interested in. I briefly mentioned the people, process, and tools that could form a good mix of a solution. I would like to hear your view on that. Burak, if you'd like to start, do you agree with the fact that with these 3 pillars? If so, for each pillar, what would you say is the most relevant? So what do you think? Maybe if we just start with people, what do you think could be done at the organizational level to change the way metrics are defined and improve this consistency problem?
I think for people, we need to build something that will give the confidence to the business people to analyze the data in an ad hoc way. So if we come to that state, we will probably come up with the solution that works for everyone. But they are not patient enough. So they need to rely on all these metrics and make sure that everything is correct and reliable, so that they don't need to ask the data people to verify all these metrics. So it's more of a mindset, but we need to have the right tooling, right workflow process to be able to make sure that it's working just fine. First of all, we'll probably need to store all this data in a single source of truth. to be able to get there, so that we don't need to define a metric in an Excel sheet and another one in our data warehouse. So with that mindset, data warehouse solutions are becoming our single source of truth. We collect all this data into our data warehouse, marketing data, CRM data, all of company data. And then we, once we have all this data in a single place, we use tools to manage this data. We use DBT to, for example, define our data models, define our metrics, and we set up our alarms, and we use data observability tools to monitor all these metrics. We use data catalog tools to see where our data is, what kind of dashboards should we be looking at for specific use cases. But it's more of mindset. Without the mindset, tools really don't make sense, or the processes.
Yeah, for sure. Allegra, what are your view on that? For you, is any of these three pillars more important? If so, which one? How do you see the question?
Yeah, so I think I would definitely agree with Barak on the fact that we need to extend confidence to business folks to feel like they're comfortable enough to self-serve metrics for themselves. But the whole process of actually defining a metric is very challenging. And so I do think the solution is treating metrics as sort of the end-all be-all data product versus dashboards or other sort of more contextualized stories around data. So metrics are what both data teams and business teams care about. They're comped on them. And then maybe, you allow functional business teams to choose how they want to tell the story with data, or what BI or visualization tool they want to do, what sort of operational workflows this data should feed into. But essentially decoupling the metric abstraction from the downstream viz component. And I think we're seeing this in the market as well. We're obviously seeing more headless BI approaches. We're seeing Looker pivot back towards being sort of that semantic layer. We're seeing more of sort of the open sourcing of metric frameworks. And that's because the hard part is defining metrics and getting alignment across the board on what metrics are, and then how to reuse them in technical and non-technical contexts. So if we sort of even take a step back, like, what does it actually mean to define a metric for the business? Who defines it? Is it CEO? Is it the board? Is it the VP of sales? Do we broadcast this to the company and not just rely on sort of de facto standards? And then, of course, once we've defined a metric in layman's terms, you've got a KPI, you've got ARR, and that's total cost of subscription and expansion revenue minus cancellations. Does the data engineer know that the company switched over, billing systems, and now they source their tables from Stripe, and those need to be piped over to Snowflake with Stitch? Is the VP of sales job to let the data team know about those source systems? How often does the data need to be refreshed for, Tableau dashboards? And then, of course, what happens when all of that changes? When the company gets their Series C and hires a huge sales team, and they, fork regional distribution of accounts, which means a new column is added to the database, and a new filter needs to be filtered on in, a Tableau dashboard for SMB Austin territory that, that specific regional sales team cares about. And so there's like plenty of these decisions that are made by executives for business reasons that affect data pipelines. And then on the reverse side, plenty of technological constraints that hinder the translation of data into sort of like useful KPIs. And this happens on an ongoing basis. And so what needs to happen is that context needs to be shared cross-functionally for any company to be able to deliver useful metrics. And that needs to be done in an iterative process, an ongoing way. Folks on the technical and business side need to have a relationship in an ongoing way. Organization has to have clear guardrails on, what a metric is, how it's defined, what happens when it changes. And then once all of these sort of people and institutional processes are set in stone, then the tooling can come in to provide sort of that context that each side requires. So things like, version control for any code-based metrics, or governance for more of sort of the institutional backing on the business side. So of course, classic answer, it's a little bit of sort of all of the different things you mentioned above. It's people, it's process, it's tools, but most importantly, I think it's people and process, and then the tools can come in to sort of enhance or provide that structure to ensure that the right processes are in place to deliver actionable insights.
Yeah, thanks. It's super interesting because a lot of people think you can just plug a tool and it will magically solve all the problems, but most of the time it's not like that. Zdenek, for you, which pillar is more important, and which for each pillar, is there any specific recommendation you would have in terms of workflows, organizational changes, and tools?
Yeah, so I think that I agree, what Allegra and Burak were saying. So on the other hand, I look at it from the kind of how we can help, what we can change, what's in as a vendor, how we can contribute to like adoption of the metric stores. And I think it's ultimately hard to change the way how people behave in different organizations, especially in our case when we are delivering the analytics to like thousands of organizations. So kind of defining some kind of normalized process, how all these guys, all these companies should consume it and use it and define their processes is, I think, impossible. So at the end of the day, I believe that the key aspect is to kind of drive is in those tools actually. So in the platforms, in the ways how we expose metrics. So if we drive the alignment of people with catalogs, for example, the alignment of business and technical people, if the business people will be able to understand, the metric definition, and that obviously that metric is defined in multiple layers. So they need to see some kind of lineage and all these things. It will increase the trustworthiness, and it will also drive the adoption of the metric store. Also, if we allow those people to consume those metrics from their applications or their tools, or if it's Excel, or if it's Power BI, or if it's like their dashboard embedded something that they work with some app, that also helps, because they're not gonna need to download, export the data, create some data copy, and that's where the problem starts, right? So because typically when you download some data, you already have them outdated, you are getting different results, it's not consistent, and so on, right? If it make it very easy to work with metric, if we make it modular, for example, if we allow composition of the metrics, so derive their metrics from other metrics, and so on and so on. If we allow them to easily discover those metrics, so they don't create duplicities of these metrics, and so on. So this is all within the realm of those tools, and I think that those are like simpler contributions. Those are those contributions that we as a vendor can do much easier than just defining some kind of normalized process and changing behaviors of people in large, small companies, right?
Yeah, no, it's definitely true that in theory, it would be great if everyone could change mindset and behavior. Practice, it's a bit harder to see. But
yeah, I have problem with my kids, to change their behaviors, and they are just you. So like.
Yeah, that's the first place where you see that. Well, anyhow, we've kind of made clear that changing people, mindset, and processes is important. But I think we've also established that that having the right tool can at least help with solving the problem. Largely. So the tools that today, the data tools that specialize in solving this problem are metric stores, and you all three have a lot of experience with these tools. So I want to go into more tool-focused question on metric store, starting with these tools are quite new, and which technological changes do you see bringing about the birth of metric stores and the need for metric stores in company? And Zdenek, if you want to start again on this one, that'd be great.
So you mean what what's kind of in front of us, what are the kind of key features or key capabilities of these metric stores, right? That's the that's your question.
What are the technological changes that brought about the need for metric stores? Like why did metric store emerge in the first place?
Yeah, I think that this is, for the most part, this is consistency. So if you look at the large businesses today, if you ask just basic questions like what's the revenue in last quarter, you will get like many different answers based on what data people use to compute this, or what different tools and different expressions and definitions they are using. So I think that the key driver for this is consistency and ability for all the people or the consumers, and this is obviously a growing population, to see the same numbers and drive those decisions, the same decisions based on the consistent numbers. I think that the consistency is the main reason why metric stores are becoming popular.
Yeah, thank you, Burak. What do you think about it? Yeah, right.
So I think it's more of also complexity. Historically, people were using Excel sheets to manage everything, right? I'm not that old enough, but I would like to be like in that area that when it was easier. But right now, let's take one example: revenue. All of the businesses wants to keep track of their revenue, right? So historically, it was easier because their revenue stream was coming from a single channel, maybe. But right now, businesses contact with their customers through different channels. To be able to calculate their revenue, they need to think about trials, refunds, and everything. Their marketplace sales, or their online web stores, everything. So it's not easy to build up a revenue metric today. You need to count. You need to take into account the multiple downstream data sources and store all this data in a single place to be able to calculate it. So this is why we have the data warehouse, and this is one of the reasons of this complexity. And the other reason is that we want to consume these metrics from multiple tools. That's the whole idea of headless BI as well. We were just using Tableau or a BI tool to be able to access all these metrics, but now in a single organization, there are different personas that need to interact with these metrics, like the business people, data scientists, data analysts, product managers, marketing people, all of them. And all of these departments prefer different tools. So we are going into this decentralization era in the B2B tools as well. They use the right tools for the right job, and all these tools need to have the access to the metrics in a convenient and consistent way. So that's why we have something called metric store, where you define everything that you need once, and then talk to the downstream tools for different use cases, for different user interfaces.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. Zdenek, what would you like to talk us through? What do you see as the main use cases of a metric store?
I think that I would start, from the consumption. So the main use case is that whatever I have, in terms of tools, if I'm like even like professional analyst, if I'm developer, if I am just regular business person who is working with some application or Excel or Power BI, whatever, I need to be able to consume the metric from that one consistent place that Burak was talking about, right? So this is like consumption of the metrics relying on the fact that the metric is defined on top of the same data set, on the consistent data. It's actually defined consistently itself, meaning like the expression that is computing the metric is the same. So that's the That's the kind of first important use case. Another important use case is discovery, that I can find, what metrics are available, and I can find the documentation. I can, if I need to drill down and understand, whether that metric is computed with text, without text, or what's the definition, and whether this is suitable for me. So some kind of data catalog, and so on and so on. Then there are many change management processes. So I need to understand that something is changing. I need to be notified because I rely on this. If I'm creating if I'm using some application, or if I'm developing the application and the metric is changing, I'll be affected. So I need some kind of notification mechanisms and solid change management. And so those are like the most important use cases from the kind of outside world, from how people consume. The consumption use cases are, I think, the most important.
Yeah, thank you. Allegra, do you want to?
And then obviously there are like many of them, like data ops, and how to kind of evolve everything, and how to make everything like consistent, and how to manage the change, from the kind of versioning perspective and so on.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Allegra, do you want to complete with other use cases, or do you feel like they've, like Zdeněk has described the majority of it?
I think he probably has. I think the first sort of big piece is like the higher level, I call it executive reporting, but it's really the sort of key KPIs that drive organizational alignment across the board. So all of the metrics that like a sales team would want to share with the rest of the company, so that the rest of the company understands, how many trialers are about to kick off, because engineering cares from a resourcing perspective, and product has, a few releases that they want to get through before they, spin up a bunch of new trials and start to engage with those new prospects. So there's like the higher level, like what are the metrics that the rest of the business cares about that we need to all be aligned on. And then there's sort of the more exploratory use cases around, what are the metrics that my business cares about? I've just joined this company and I want to understand how we think about our business. I'm going to go to the metric store to understand, how sales thinks about things, how engineering, product, et cetera, to do exploratory sort of understanding of what those metrics are, and then how those might extend to other operational workflows. So the metric store is like the one-stop shop for like, how does the business think about itself and track changes of performance over time? But then what are the metrics that I can use in other downstream tools and integrate with, so that I can build more sort of operational workflows that are more specific to me as an individual contributor, for instance.
So how would you define maybe what are the exact benefits of a metric store, like the 2 or 3 main benefits that it would bring to a company? If you had to sum this up, what would it be?
I would definitely say, I think we've hit on this point a lot, consistency. So there are a lot of downstream tools that have, either bespoke ways to define and abstract metrics that live within those tools. So you could think of like LookML and Looker. You can think of any sort of SQL that's tied to a Tableau dashboard. Those abstractions live at that level, which then are not exposed to higher levels, meaning end users don't really understand how things are defined. And then you can extend those definitions elsewhere. So with the metric store, you would get that consistency that you can push to downstream tools to make sure everyone is operating off of the same assumptions and there's a consensus on how metrics are defined, which means that there will be more alignment across the board. And then I would also say increased productivity. I mean, the reason for creating a metric that is this like KPI that's quantifiable that then can be sliced and diced by different things or filtered is so that, analysts don't have to rewrite the same SQL, but switch out a where clause or join in another table to pull in one other field. It allows for those analysts to sort of offload the work that they're doing to business folks who care about that slicing and dicing. What that slicing and dicing is new SQL queries that need to be written. And now the analyst has time freed up to spend more time on, other data pipeline work that actually interests them, instead of having to rewrite the same SQL or worse, share those snippets across different teams and hope that they're writing, the right things to Snowflake and not writing too expensive of queries, et cetera. So I definitely say, consistency and increased productivity.
Okay, thank you so much. That's super clear. Now, in terms of how metric stores fit within the modern data stack, so in between data warehouse, data observability tool, data visualization tool, where do you see the metric store fitting? Maybe Burak, you can take this one.
Yeah, of course. So we first need to define everything, all the metrics in a single place. DBT is getting there, but in terms of the modern data stack, let's say that we are using DBT to define all of our metrics, all of our data models, and use the downstream tools to analyze them. Essentially, all these downstream tools just see database tables when DBT transforms data within a single data warehouse. But we need to have a middleware layer, which is the metric store in this case, to be able to expose all these metrics to the downstream tools. The data warehouses only have the notion of tables and columns. They don't know the metrics. So this middleware layer can talk to the downstream tools, which might be a BI tool like Tableau, or a Jupyter notebook, a Python environment, an embedded analytics tool that needs to access a RESTful API. So this middleware layer, our metric store, can just take care of all these metric definitions, so you don't need to define them in your Tableau workbooks or in your Jupyter notebooks, in Python environment, or when you are running a transformation SQL query. So it is our middleware layer in between the transformation tool and the downstream tools where we utilize this data for different use cases. It's not just the BI use cases, it might be marketing use cases through reverse ETL tools, or it might be CRM use cases, it might be analytics use cases, it might be anything really, because at the end of the day, marketing tools also needs to have access to my metrics as well, or the CRM tools. So it's our middleware layer in between transformation and downstream tools in this picture.
Okay, thank you. And Zdeněk, do you have anything to add on where do you see metric store fitting on the modern data stack?
Yeah, I agree. It's essentially the layer between the database and the consumption tools, all the applications or spreadsheets or whatever those mere mortals use. And I think that we all here agree that metric, like being a number, it's much more consumable than query. My experience is when I talk to regular people, if I try to even explain them the concept of query, how to retrieve the data, it's kind of foreign to them. So metric is a number, it's a new is a number. They can multiply, they can subtract, they can work with it as they are used to, right? So I believe that what Allegra said is more productivity, because people work with numbers, with known concepts, is very much true. That's one of the actually biggest benefits that it actually provides people with much more kind of familiar and easier to use abstract than query.
And still in the same area, how do you see metric store and data catalogs fitting together, or not fitting together, but how do you see them interacting? I'm not sure whether you're familiar with data catalogs, but yes, Zdeněk, what do you think about how they interact?
Yeah, they absolutely do. So I think that those data catalogs, if you look at all those things like Colibra or Atlas and those data catalog products, they are still kind of aimed a lot at professional people, at data analysts and people who know what the columns are and tables are and so on. So I think that ultimately what we need to kind of elevate this kind of one one level up and make it consumable by regular people. And I think that that is a huge opportunity for us, because as people understand numbers, I think if we start talking about revenue, how it's computed, how the margin is computed, and all those other things, that's going to be much more understandable. So I think that the data catalogs needs to be kind of elevated. They needs to be more usable by people who are consuming those numbers. So I think that yes, data catalogs are actually very important, and I think similarly as analytics, we are embedding analytics. So we are trying to get that analytics as close to the end users as possible. So we are not really showing them metrics and dimensions and all these things in the first place. We are showing them charts, right? I think the same thing needs to happen with catalogs. They need to essentially have some kind of Google-like experience, search experience, and some much more consumable and easy to use experience. And those data catalogs should do that.
So do you feel that maybe I've understood wrongly, but so do you feel like the metric store makes the data catalog in a company, if the company has a data catalog, more consumable by business users, more digestible to non-technical users, or have I understood wrongly?
Yep, absolutely. I think that if you look at Excel, I think what's the most successful data analytics tool ever, right? It's Excel. Yeah. So, and then why? Because it works with numbers. People understand numbers. They can just do those basic operations with cells. It's easy to use. If you show them SQL, they aren't stuck. They don't know how to work with it. Yeah. So we are essentially kind of trying to build a better abstraction for them, and that's what metric store are all about. Besides the consistency, and then because if it's going to be successful, and I truly believe it will, then what we will see a lot of metrics around the enterprise. There are a lot of metrics, in every single company. So we need to start organizing them, and we need to prevent that Excel hell. We can't get that again. So we need to really have those common definitions, and we need to people to trust those numbers. And that's where data catalogs comes in.
Okay, thank you. And my last question, and Allegra, I'll turn to you for that, is how in practice do you see data teams using metric store? So I assume it's used by different profiles, technical profiles that would define metrics in code, and also by non-technical users who read them. I mean, how do you see data teams using metric store in terms of who uses them, how often, and when?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's lots of different sort of personas or roles or titles who would comprise a data team that would be involved in the sort of definition in code of metrics. So that could be data analysts, data engineers, data scientists. It sort of depends on the makeup of the organization and their data team. But I think what the process of defining metrics in code in a metric store allows for is for those data teams to give just the right amount of context and really ensure trust in how those metrics are going to be used downstream by end users. So to your sort of previous question around how do data catalogs and metric stores actually interact, the way I see it is data catalogs are sort of the raw data assets, sort of the development environment for data, where a technical person, a data engineer, data scientist, whomever, could go in and understand the lineage of data and understand where a piece of data comes from, what sort of the whole pipeline looks like, from the third-party sources that it comes from to the airflow streams that are piping all the way to their Snowflake, or maybe it's Databricks. There's a lot to track, and so exposing that lineage and then maybe passing that through even to the metric store will allow end users to feel more comfortable with how those metrics are defined. And so the metric store is kind of like the productionalization of that data. It's the data product that gets served to the business so that the business can go about their day and make decisions based off that data and integrate with Tableau or Looker or whatever BI tools they're using. to sort of make sense of that data. So it allows data teams really to like give enough context around here's how this metric was defined, here are all the places that it came from, and here's how you should expect to use it, so that they can actually offload that work realistically to business users to then, go to their metric store and search and transform. We even call this the metric catalog today, to search for their metric, slice and dice it, and then move on. So it's sort of the handoff from data teams to business users is how I see that going in practice.
Okay, so it's interesting. So you see the metric store as reconciling both technical and non-technical users, as technical users defining and giving the context around metrics, and then non-technical user consume that without altering, without changing it. They consume it for business reporting needs they have, right?
Exactly.
Okay, well, very clear. Thank you. Just want to make sure we have enough time for questions if you have any. So it's time for any participants to unmute yourself and ask a question, whether it's a high-level questions on consistency over metrics or product-specific question on a good data transform or a metricule. Feel free to ask.
I actually want to answer one question.
Yeah.
Allegra mentioned about, like, before getting into Allegra mentioned about this data products. I think this is a great mindset. So to answer your previous question, as a developer, I would like to think that these data people, analytics engineers who are defining the metrics, are our developers. The data catalogs are essentially our front end. So everyone in the organization access the data through data catalog. They take care of all the integration. Metric store take care of making sure that everything is consistent. Transformation layers, the data warehouse layer, make sure that everything is in the right place. So when you think about the whole picture, it's a product for internal stakeholders. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's not underlined enough, but if we start seeing it as a product, it might help us ameliorate it. So we have a question here in the chat by Alexander, who would like to know how can you clarify how the cloud helps? So who wants to take this question?
I mean, is it the cloud data warehouse? It depends on the question. I mean, where we are tapping into, but the cloud essentially is our data warehouse, cloud data warehouse in this context, for example, right? That's my understanding. If that's what Alexander is referring to, it's our single source of truth. So we store all this data in the cloud and define our metrics to point to something in that cloud data warehouse and expose the data through the. That's my.
Yeah, I think. Yeah. Sorry. So if I look at our company, we've been in cloud for like last decade, and it really helps us. Our mission is to deliver analytics to like many organizations, all business partners or all customers or certain organization. And I can't even imagine how this can happen without cloud. That's a distribution mechanism in the first place, right? So it allows distribute the applications and the underlying data infrastructures and everything consistently to many different users. I own data centers, we would still have like half of the capabilities and everything, because we would be spending a lot of our efforts within just basic infrastructure. So to me, it's absolutely clear it's a huge accelerator to how to deliver those like SaaS applications and all the infrastructures and data at the end of the day to many different users.
Yeah, thank you. I think there was another question from Ben. If you want to unmute yourself. Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah. So just one question with regards to some of the assumptions behind the metric store. So a lot of discussion revolves around the data warehouse and how the data warehouse is basically the backend for the metric store. And I'm really curious whether the construct applies outside of data at rest and whether it extends to data in motion, for instance, and stream processing and all those streaming services, which are becoming more and more one of the norm when it comes to data availability and data processing.
I can say yes, absolutely. So if you look at where I think the industry is heading right now, data warehouse is just one of the channels. If you look at all those things, like Dremio just got a huge investment yesterday. So these data lakes and lake houses that are consolidating data from streams and from like cloud warehouses and from like storages and everything. They are on the rise. So absolutely, that doesn't matter, where the data live and how they get to the metric, to the metric computation.
There is this concept called data mesh, where we have the data in different data sources. So if we want to join the data, we need a transform, like we need a query interface, something like SQL. So the data should live in data warehouse. But if we are querying to our Google Sheets or Excel, then we can have theoretically our metric store sitting in front of our Google Sheets. That's what we are trying to do as well. So the data should be in data warehouse if we need transformation, but the live data sources like Google Sheets can only be used as an alternative if you need real-time system.
I think the only thing that I would add to that is metrics are basically denormalized data sets that are like revenue by, channel, distribution, region, etc. There are a lot of different permutations. And so managing all of those different permutations as different tables at different levels of granularity in a warehouse is possible because storage is a lot cheaper these days and you can separate storage and compute. But the query that you're writing and really the business question will determine what table is actually required. And so that's something that should likely happen at query time unless you're operating at crazy scale and then you need to materialize those tables and schedule them at a certain time because it's going to be too expensive. But you don't want to have to manage all of those different permutations as different tables that need to listen to their own ETLs for when those tables update. You want to do that on the front end based on basically what business question is being asked. Like as a sales team leader, I want to know ARR by my sales team. And so going to the metric store, going to your Tableau dashboard or wherever it is, you want that point to be the SQL construction point, not something that you need to manage within the warehouse itself. You want to set up the right table structures and systems to be able to fuel that type of analysis for downstream analytics, but you don't want to be managing each of those different questions essentially as different tables in the warehouse.
Yeah, thanks. We had another question.
I'm not sure if I agree actually. So if we just define, sorry, can I just quickly comment on this?
Yeah.
So if we define, I think that the definition of metric being some kind of denormalized table in a warehouse is very narrow, and it's also very complex. So I think that and that then kind of leaves away things like streams, for example, and other data sources, that do not work well with some kind of data at rest and kind of static data. So I think that we should really present metric more as a variable or a number, and it's also much easier concept for end users.
Yeah, thanks. I'll try to cover the two last questions before we wrap up the meeting. So we had a question from Charles, who would like to hear your opinion on how you would define the difference between a semantic layer and a metrics layer, if you feel like there is a difference between the two.
I can answer. So semantic, actually a great question. It's confusing as well for me, even for me as someone who is working especially on metrics store. My take on this is that metrics are the first party citizens in metrics layer. So we interact with the data in terms of metrics. I want this metrics drilled down with this dimension. So I want to see my revenue drilled down with country, for example. Whereas in a semantic layer, we just call it data set instead of table. So it's an abstraction layer to my data store. So we are still talking about tables and columns, but we just call it something different, data set and dimension. There is no concept of measure or metric in semantic layer. We, like in most cases, some tools also added metric definition, but semantic layer is essentially defining a semantic abstracted layer that I can interact with under the hood. It can interact with different data stores at the same time, but I'm still talking in terms of tables and columns.
Thank you.
Now, let me add that unfortunately there is a huge confusion about semantic layers. So if you look at, I was, a couple of minutes ago, I was talking about Remio. They describe the semantic layer in very different terms than we are describing it, for example. So some kind of standardization and some kind of common vocabulary is needed. I think that we are really suffering from the fact that we are not standardized enough. The only thing what is really standardized in our industry is SQL. And SQL is kind of not the best abstraction for sharing data with business. So I think that there is some kind of work ahead of us to come up with that common vocabulary and common protocols and common definitions. What's semantic? What are the semantic elements?
Yeah, thanks. Last question from Cynthia. What are some examples of good data catalogs and data stores you would recommend for a SaaS company? So I can start by taking this one for once. Well, Castor is the best data catalog I can recommend, and Castor was born out of the need of data cataloging for SaaS companies, as Dinek, you mentioned, Colibra or Alashan as data catalogs, but they cater to enterprise level company. So that's why we created Castor. So you're welcome to check it out. And maybe any of you have other recommendations of catalog or data stores.
I think it's really hard for a SaaS company to adopt everything. It's really, time consuming to build a metrics layer, build a data warehouse solution. So if I would be in your foot, I would probably stick with something simple, like all-in-one solution, at least in the beginning. So if I'm using Stripe for revenue, they have a revenue analytics solution. I will use something like Google Analytics to analyze my product data. They all have integration with the data warehouse at the end of the day. So in the future, I can just use ELT tools to push all this data into the data warehouse and build my metrics layer later on. But it's easier to start with this plug and play tools to see what you really need, and then iterate from that later on depending on your needs, rather than building everything from scratch.
Yeah, I would have vested interest at good data, but for SaaS companies, I truly believe that good data is actually the ideal solution, because besides the analytics, we also provide we handle multi-tenancy and delivery mechanisms and many other aspects, how to deliver analytics to your users, not only metric stores, but also embedding of the data visualizations and so on, data models. and we can access many different databases and so on and so on. So so my answer would be obvious: good data.
Right, guys, I think it's time to wrap up. As Philip just said in the chat, very interesting discussion on a very complex topic. So thank you so much for taking this hour and for all your thoughts. Just as a notice, we're organizing this kind of event every month. The next one is about how to measure the ROI of your data team, and it's featuring the head of data at Clearbit and head of data at Khan Academy. So if you're interested in joining us, you can be kept posted through either my LinkedIn page or if you're participated to this event, I'll make sure you're aware of the next ones to come. Anyway, thank you so much for everyone who attended and for our three speakers. Again, such an interesting conversation to help us untangle the topic.
Thank you, Luis, for having us. Great
thank you.
discussion. Thank you.
Thanks. It was my pleasure. Thanks.
Bye.
Right.
Thank you.